Give us this day our daily bread. That's what Jesus said in this portion of the Lord's Prayer. That's not a statement most Westerners pray very well, is it? We're a people of excess in a land of abundance. We're accustomed to having not just what we need for today, but we're prepared for every catastrophe, every unexpected expense, even loss of income in drastic situations. And we have a plan for every calamity. And if we're being honest, most of us probably don't feel a need to pray for God to give us daily bread because we have storehouses full of our own provisions. But can you remember what it's like to need daily bread? Maybe it goes back to you, for you, it goes back to your young adult years, or maybe it goes all the way back to your first few years of marriage, or maybe even a circumstance after a hardship where you weren't financially, physically, or maybe even spiritually prepared for it. On your own, you didn't have enough to get through the day, let alone through the month or through that crisis. I had one of those situations in 2009. My wife and I were closing out a season of ministry in Boise, Idaho, and we were preparing to move to start a new ministry in Durango, Colorado. At the time, we were a young family of 4, and we didn't have a whole lot of money, and money was actually super tight. We already weren't making very much money, and then on top of that, we were taking a pay cut to go to this small church in a tourist town in Colorado where it was significantly more expensive to live. If you're old enough, you probably remember what happened to the economy in 2008 and 2009. There was a major recession and millions of people were upside down on their mortgage loans. In spite of the economic landscape and the mortgage that we had, we needed to offload that mortgage. We needed to be free of it so that we could start our new ministry. And in spite of all of that, we still followed the call of God. When we moved, we had exactly 3 months worth of mortgage payments in the bank saved up in case we needed to make payments after we moved. That would keep us afloat as we started our new ministry in Colorado. Back then it was nothing for a house to be on the market for 3 months. Many houses were actually on the market for upwards of a year or more. Housing inventory just wasn't moving in that economy very fast. Yet we trusted God. And if it was God's will, we trusted that He was going to provide, even though we couldn't see how He was going to make it all come together for our good. And wouldn't you know it, we had an offer after just 2 months. I told our realtor when that offer came in, I said, if this offer is anywhere near the asking price that we've been asking, we're taking that offer. I can't afford to hold on to this house for longer than 3 months. And as God would work out, as He often does, the offer came in just below the asking price. But after we closed out our escrow account, we were literally within $100 of breaking exactly even on what we owed on that mortgage. Did we get rich? No. Did it set us up to buy a dream home in Colorado? Nope. We broke even. And even though we would have loved to have made tens of thousands of dollars on the sale of that home, instead, we were thanking God for His provision because we were remembering the fact that many people were backwards on their loans, but we had broken even for that day. He proved Himself to us for that day, for that season. It's like He said to us, trust me today and I'll give you exactly what you need. It's quite possible that our trust in Him grows when our dependence on Him grows, and our dependence on Him grows when we have come to the end of ourselves. A couple weeks ago, you might remember I referenced a story from Exodus chapter 16 about the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. They were just miles into their journey to the promised land, and they ran out of food rations. So they started to complain, they started to grumble against God and against Moses and Aaron because they were hungry and they didn't know where their food source was going to come from. Imagine trying to feed a nation of hundreds of thousands of people in a wilderness desert. Only God could provide for them, and provide He did. He gave them quail at night, He gave them manna in the morning. But He would only provide enough food for that day. Why is that? Why would He treat them that way? Not because God didn't have the resources or the capacity, but because He wanted to build a relationship of trust with His people every day. By giving them the bread they needed on a daily basis, it forced the people to think about God, His provision, and their faith in Him very differently. You see, even as slaves in Egypt, the Israelites had provisions. Some of them were provided to them by Egypt, and some of them were provisions of their own. They didn't need to depend on God in those days, even though they were slaves. But this new covenant with God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and Jacob, would demand that these people trust God to provide for them every single day. And I love that God heard the grumblings of his people. Even though they complained about their situation, he knew their needs. Exodus chapter 16, Moses said this. He said, "When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumblings that you grumble against him." Moses was telling the people, like, hey, he's going to provide for you every day because you have asked him and maybe even complained. But it's pretty clear that in the beginning stages of this covenant relationship between Israel and God, that the people didn't trust God from day to day. They griped, they complained, like petulant children, like we sometimes do. But God is still good. And he knew what the people needed more than they did, and he knew it before they did. And he already had a plan for their provision. And even though it required daily gathering of manna and quail, whatever amount was gathered for that day was just enough to fill them. Was this the way the Israelites wanted to survive in the wilderness? No. Because they actually threatened to go back to slavery in Egypt because things weren't as easy in the wilderness as it was in slavery. Is this the way that we prefer for things to go today? Probably not. But is this the way for God to prove himself faithful to us? Yes. Is this the way for us to learn dependence upon God? Yes. Is this a way for us to express obedience to God? Yes, yes, yes. Your Heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask it, so just ask him. But just remember, while he's a good and benevolent Father who wants to provide for his children, remember his greater goal is to receive glory through how he provides for you. And we glorify him when we trust him with our today and let go of tomorrow's anxieties for provision. It's interesting what Jesus taught on the heels of the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6. He taught on trust. At the end of the chapter in Matthew 6:34, it says this, "Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own troubles." Now, I want you to take some time to discuss your faith in God and what it looks like when it comes to you waiting on his provision for your needs today. I hope you have a great conversation with your group.